A blessed Sunday to everyone. A friend of mine asked me if I know how to catch a monkey. And because I do not have any experience of catching monkeys, I told him, I know how to fish. I know how to catch crabs. I had a lot of experience catching crabs back then, either using an instrument or without any instrument, just with my bare hands. I had that experience. But catching monkeys, I did not experience yet. I do not know how. And he said, there are a lot of ways to do that. One of the conventional ways is you get a cocoa fruit, a coconut. A cocoa fruit, you make a hole on that fruit. Just a little hole that is enough for the monkey to put in his hand. After making a hole, you pour the water, of course, you put a bait inside it and leave the fruit in the midst of a place where there are monkeys. Sooner or later, they will notice that there is something inside it. They'll get curious and they'll get that thing inside the fruit. And when they put their hands like this, their hand inside the hole, it would really fit the hole. But by the time they'll grab that thing inside the fruit, they won't be able to get out their hand anymore, because it's already in this form. So it won't fit with the hole anymore. And the attitude of the monkey is this: once they take a hold of what's inside it, they'll never let go of it. As I was thinking about this, I said this speaks a lot about people in our time in relation to our attitude to material things. That individuals in this world this time has succumbed into the rat race of financial increase, that people would like to increase more their wealth, their resources. And once a person takes hold of it, oftentimes, the person wouldn't like to let go of it. That's a common characteristic. No wonder there are people who approach me saying like this, Pastor, we need your help. And I asked the question, why? What's the problem? And a person responded telling me that their parents already want to be with the Lord, and the parents left them with properties. They have land, they have money in the bank. The problem is there are 5 of them and they are quarreling over it. More to that, one of them wanted to kill the other already because of the wealth. That's a crazy thing to imagine about. But listen, it is happening in the real life. Why? Because there are many human beings that when they take hold of a wealth, they would never let go of it. How should the attitude of a Christian like us? What shall be the behavior of a believer, a follower of Jesus, in terms of material things? Let us discover from the writings of the Apostle Paul this evening. Let us open our Bibles in the book of 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 to 15. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 to 15. Let's discover from these writings of the Apostle the right behavior of individuals like you and me in relation to material things. From the New English Translation, the word of the Lord says, "Now we make known to you, brothers and sisters, the grace of God given to the church of Macedonia, that during a severe ordeal of suffering, their abundant joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in the wealth of their generosity. For I testify, they gave according to their means and beyond their means. They did so voluntarily, begging us with great earnestness for the blessing and fellowship of helping the saints. And they did this not just as we had hoped, but they gave themselves first to the Lord and to us by the will of God. Thus we urge Titus that just as he had previously begun the work, so also he should complete this act of kindness for you. But as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, and in all eagerness, and in the love from us that is in you, make sure that you excel in this act of kindness too. I am not saying this as a command, but I am testing the genuineness of your love by comparison with the eagerness of others. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that although he was rich, he became poor for your sakes, so that you by his poverty could become rich. So here is my opinion on this matter. It is to your advantage, since you made a good start last year, both in your giving and your desire to give, to finish what you started, so that just as you wanted to do it eagerly, you can also complete it according to your means. For if the eagerness is present, the gift itself is acceptable according to whatever one has, not according to what he does not have. For I do not say this so there would be relief for others and suffering for you, just as a matter of equality. At the present time, your abundance will meet their need, so that one day their abundance may also meet your need, and thus there may be equality. As it is written, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. May the good Lord bless the reading of his word. Now, what was happening back then was this. Paul continued to collect offerings and love gifts from churches in different cities. He did this not for himself. Paul collected the gifts from the different churches not to accumulate wealth for himself. He did this because he was facilitating a help for the church in Jerusalem, the mother church. Now wait a minute. What was happening in Jerusalem that the church needed money? You know, the church needs money. I remember what Attorney June Vencer said, money is not everything, but without it is embarrassing. Well, that conveys a lot of reality, though it's not everything, but we need money. The church in Jerusalem needed money. For what reason? There were several poor members of the church in Jerusalem. Really? Why were there poor people in Jerusalem? Isn't it a significant city in the history of Christianity? Yes. It plays a huge role in the history of Christianity, and there are a lot of poor people in that particular city as members of the church in Jerusalem. And the reason for that are this. First, Christianity started in Jerusalem. The Spirit of God descended upon the apostles, and they started in Jerusalem. But the problem is this. As Christianity was starting in Jerusalem, many of the people rejected Christianity. I told you last time when I spoke from the book of Acts that there were thousands of converts in the first preaching of the gospel in Jerusalem. But they were still minority in the city, because majority of the people living in Jerusalem were followers of Judaism. When the religious leaders in Jerusalem rejected Christianity, many of the people also rejected Christianity. And because of that, the members of the early church were ostracized economically and socially. Probably some of them who were businessmen, some of them experienced being rejected by the other businessmen, refusing to conduct any engagements with them because of their newfound faith. So they were ostracized. Probably some of them were workers of different, establishment or employees of businesses back then. But when their employers found out that they were Christians, they were released and removed from their job. And so they were left being so isolated in terms of the social condition of their lives. That is why there were many poor Christians back then in Jerusalem. You see the experience of sufferings of the individuals in that city. That was happening. Added to that was the famine that took place in the land of the Palestines. Palestine, in the year AD 46. So if there was a famine, there were experiences like that. Added was the famine that really happened in that particular place. Then the problem even became gigantic for them to face. Their letter to the Corinthian believers, the second letter, was written in AD 57. So that was more than 10 years after the famine happened. Pastor, hindi pa ba tapos yung famine or yung effect ng famine 10 years later? Probably. Probably the famine has already ended. But the effect of the famine in the economy was still felt even by the people living 10 years later. Remember the time of Naomi and his family in the book of Ruth? They left Israel to go to a foreign land. Why? Because there was a famine in their land. And then how long did they stay in the foreign land? Around 10 years or more. Why? Because they waited for a rain to come in Israel before they went back to their place. For 10 years, there was no rain. When a famine happened in the ancient East, it happens not only in 1 year. It happens in 5 years, it happens in 10 years, and sometimes even more than that. And so, probably the famine already ended during the time that Paul wrote the second letter to the Corinthians, but the effect of the famine probably was still there. And so the more reason we can find why there were several poor members of the church in Jerusalem. And thus, out of the poverty, visiting church one after the other, he was encouraging the believers to continue giving for those who are needy in the church inside Jerusalem. This gives us the idea that once a local church, it can tell to itself that we're a family here. Like in Zikaik, we're a family here. Okay? But we belong to a bigger unit. We are a family here in Zamboanga City Alliance Evangelical Church. But we belong to a bigger family. If you look at it from the lens of the whole Philippines, we belong to the Christian and Missionary Alliance Churches of the Philippines. So we belong to a bigger family. That is why if there are churches that are in need within Kamakop, we are willing to extend our help to those churches who are in need. Just like this time, a pastor chatted me last time that out of the Odette typhoon, somewhere in Visayas, there was a church that was totally destroyed. And he shared to me that news because they are in great need this time, because they are planning to bring back the church in a concrete, materials already. So we belong to a bigger family. So Paul, as he ministered to the smaller churches in different cities, he knew and he was conveying to them that though we are many churches, we belong to one big family of God. That is why we ought to care for those people in Jerusalem. And this portion of the letter was an encouragement of Paul to the believers in Corinth that they will continue sharing the blessings that they had. And Paul made the appeal in two ways. I'll emphasize these two appeals that he made. In verses 1 to 6, his first appeal, I call it the testimonial appeal. Okay? Testimonial appeal. Why a testimonial appeal? Because Paul was making an appeal to the church in Corinth through the testimony of the churches in Macedonia. Now listen very carefully to what he said, beginning with verse 1. He said here, the second part of verse 1, the grace of God given to the churches in Macedonia, that during a severe ordeal of suffering, their abundant joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in the wealth of their generosity. Take note of this, that there were churches in the Macedonian area, in the Macedonian region, and the churches there were so willing to help, to extend their shares, the blessings that they had for the believers in Jerusalem. And what was their situation? Verse 2 would tell us that they were also in great poverty. In the midst of their poverty, the churches in Macedonia were still willing to share the blessings. In fact, if you look at verses 3 and 4, look at what Paul said. For I testify, they gave according to their means, and beyond their means, they did so voluntarily, begging us with great earnestness. Probably Paul, in the earlier part of the conversation that he had with the Macedonian believers, he already told them, brothers and sisters from Macedonia, please stop giving first. Please stop sharing your resources because I can see that you are in poverty. Can you please just keep the money among yourselves so that you will be able to address your needs? But what was the response of the churches in Macedonia? Look at verse 4. They begged to the apostle that they won't be stopped, that instead of stopping them from releasing the blessing, that meager amount that they had for the people in Jerusalem, they were begging to him, Paul, please don't stop us from sharing the blessing. Yes, we are in poverty right now, but our hearts are pumping. Our hearts are enjoying what we are doing because we want to share the blessing of God to our brothers and sisters. They were in poverty. Now, sometimes people in our time would think that I would only share if I have more than enough. Right? I would only share if I have more than enough. I have seen this among children. That when a child is eating something, another child would go to him or her and approach and tell, can I taste? And the child would say, this is just enough for me. Meaning to say, I don't have any spare to share with you. So just stay put. Maybe later I have some extra and I would be willing to share. The willingness to share often happens when there is more than enough. But what we are seeing here is an extraordinary, what is this heart that the Macedonian churches had, that in the midst of poverty, that to the extent that Paul was telling them already, stop sending money because I know that you are in need to. But they responded, we beg you, please receive our gifts. This might be small, but we are willing to give. And I experienced this firsthand. When we were still building this huge house of the Lord a few years ago, you know what happened one day? I was still the youth pastor back then when an old woman knocked at the office. It happened when there were no other pastors that time. She went to the office and looked for me. When she went inside, I saw her and I knew that she was not experiencing a good life economically. Because her dress was old. May mga butas pa sa kanyang dress. And then I asked her, Nanay, what are you here for? What is your reason why you visited my office? And she said, Pastor, I'd just like to hand this to you. She handed me an envelope. I did not open it. It was just there. And after handing me the envelope, sabi niya, I'll leave already. I won't stay long because I know you are busy. And I asked her as she was walking away, Nanay, where do you stay? She said, I am staying somewhere there near Boulevard. Oh, really? Are you going to ride a jeep going there? Because I know there are no jeepneys coming from Canilar that go straight to Boulevard area. So I had in mind that she's going to ride a jeepney going to Pueblo, and from Pueblo she will ride another jeep going to her house. And she told me, Pastor, I'll just walk. And I saw her slippers so old already that the straps were tied with a straw lace just for it to hold each part. And I told her, Nanay, I'll just ihatid kita. Sabi niya, no need, Pastor. I used to do this. I come to church from time to time, and I used to do this. So don't worry. I know you're busy. You just stay there. So I went back to my office, and I continued making my sermon for the TGIF that time. A few hours later, I decided to go for a lunch. I was reminded about the envelope that she handed to me. I got it because I would like to bring it to the person who can record it. But the envelope was a bit open. And I saw what's inside it. It was a 20 peso bill. And when I saw the amount inside the envelope, that really broke my heart. That old woman just walked coming to church. Maybe it was her everything. She could have used it for something else to provide for her needs. But she said, Pastor, I am giving this to build the house of the Lord. My heart was literally broken looking at the amount, and I said, my God, what's inside this envelope is worth millions before your eyes. This woman gave out of her poverty. And this is what I have discovered. When the heart says, give it, the pocket can never stop it. And this was exactly what was happening in the churches in Macedonia. They were experiencing poverty, and yet they were willing to give because their pockets were dictated by their heart. Paul, please don't stop us. We're willing to share for our brothers and sisters. We want to share our resources, even if it's just little. Even if it is not very much, please receive it and bring this to our brothers and sisters in Jerusalem. Paul used the testimony of the Macedonian churches to make an appeal to the church in Corinth. And if you look at the further part of the text that we have, in verses 7 to 9, Paul used another appeal. Okay? Verses 1 to 6, a testimonial appeal. Verses 7 to 9, it's a theological appeal. Based on the work of Jesus Christ, Paul made an appeal to the believers. He said there, but as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, and in all eagerness, and in the love from us that is in you, make sure that you excel in this act of kindness too. I'm not saying this as a command, but I am testing the genuineness of your love by comparison with the eagerness of others. Take note of verse 9. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that although he was rich, take note of that, although he was rich, he became poor for your sakes, that you by his poverty could become rich. What he was trying to point out here is this. He was relating the pre-incarnate state of Jesus. Before he came into this world, he was living in all his splendor and glory within the community of the Trinity. The Son was there with his splendor. He owns everything. He owns the whole world. He was the instrument to make all of these things that we have in this life. And the very life that we have, he owns it. He has the power to create anything. He has everything he needed. He was in his rich state. And yet, out of that, he left his glory and came into this world so that he will live among the poor. The state that he had in heaven is contrasted with the state that he had in this world. The riches that Christ had at the pre-incarnate state can never be compared with any wealth in this world. And so when he came here, Paul described it as he became poor. And literally that happens, he was born in a manger. He was born out of a peasant biological mother. He was born out of a family led by a carpenter named Joseph. He was raised in a poor environment. Jesus left his riches and came into this world that you and I may experience his riches. Now here is the thing. If you put this within the spectrum of possession, the testimony of the Macedonian church, they gave out of their poverty. Jesus, he gave out of his riches. They are not contrasted here, but the point that the Apostle Paul is trying to make to the believers in Corinth is that giving is not dictated by how much you have. Because often this is the mind of individuals today. I give based on my excess. If I have extra, I will share. What Paul was trying to say is that giving is not dictated by the pocket, it is dictated by the heart. I have been telling my wife about this even before. Generosity is not based on what you have inside your account in your bank, but generosity is inside your heart. Jesus, out of his riches, he gave up everything, he left everything, and lived in our midst that he may be able to allow us to experience the riches of his grace and of his glory someday. Whatever our status in life, we may have plenty, we may have nothing, so long that we are dictated by the generosity deep within us, we will give. This is the emphasis of the apostle here. If you look at the most repeated words that he used, in the New English Translation, take note of the word eagerness or eagerly. You can see these words. I want us to look at those words. You can see those words in verse 7, verse 8, verse 11, verse 12, repeatedly mentioned all throughout the passage. Eagerness and eagerly. Why? Paul was trying to make an emphasis that the giving of the Macedonian churches and the giving up of Christ was out of their willful desire. There was an eagerness deep within the hearts. Added to that repeated words na eagerness or eagerly, you can see words that says grace, blessing, and gift of kindness in the text. In the English translation, you don't see much how it is repeated. But when you look at the Greek text, how it is written, the word grace is charis. The word blessing is charin. The word gift of kindness is charite. Take note of how this word started. There is the chi, the letter A in the Greek alphabet, and the, what is this? The ro, the R. So if you look at these letters, these words all started with kar, charis, charin, charite. It is actually used to repeat an idea. In English translation, you won't see it because it's translated as grace, blessing, gift of kindness. But all these words are connected to each other and they are repeatedly mentioned and they convey similar thing connected with the word eagerness. Now, how is the word grace related to the act of giving? When someone gives out of grace, the basis for the giving is not the need of the person who's going to receive it. Oftentimes, people give because there is a need. Okay? But a giving out of generosity is not based on the need of the receiver, but it is dictated by the heart of the giver. I'll repeat. When giving is acted out of generosity, out of grace, it is not dictated by the need of the receiver, but by the heart of the giver. And this is exactly the theological appeal that Paul made here. What did Jesus give? He did not give a portion of his wealth. He did not give a half of his kingdom. He gave himself. Okay? He left everything. He gave himself. Why did he give himself? Did he give out of the need that he saw about human beings, about his creation? Well, if you look at the main reason why he gave it, listen to John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son. It points back to God. He gave because he loved. He gave because of his grace. He gave because he is generous himself. Have you not wondered? Have you not wondered why there are things in a form of blessings that will come into our lives? Some of them we work for, but many of them we did not work for and they just came. Have you not wondered about it? There are blessings that would come in a form of remuneration. We work and then we are compensated. We give something, then someone returns something to us. We do our business, we sell, and then money comes to us. It's out of the effort that we have done. But there are blessings in life, I tell you. They come in different forms. Sometimes they are in the form of money, in a form of a property, in a form of favor. They come into our lives, and we didn't work for them. Why do they come? The only explanation for that is that because the God that we worship is giving out of grace. And when He gives out of grace, it is not based on our effort, not based on our needs, but it is based on His heart. And it is a wonderful privilege that we serve Jesus because He is so generous that His people, even in our time, experience His wonderful blessings, and they all come not because we need it, but they all come because He is generous. And Paul made this as an appeal to the Corinthian churches. Hey, brothers and sisters in Corinth, continue giving. Did you see the testimony of the Macedonian churches? They gave out of their poverty. But more than that, continue giving because your master is a generous Lord. And today, we Christians can exemplify generosity. Why? Because we have experienced the generosity of God. I have experienced this personally and also corporately within the church. You know what? When the pandemic came, 2020, the church leadership team or the church ministry team, the CMT, your representatives, decided to release goods to members who are really having a hard time in the midst of pandemic. We shared goods not only among the members of the church, but among believers who even belong to other churches. We shared goods even among unbelievers last 2020. We shared goods even among pastors who are living outside Zamboanga City. But you know how we ended up 2020 financially? We ended with over and above finances. And this is something that I have observed. The more we share, the more He blessed. I'm not saying that we give so that He will bless us. That's not the attitude. But the point is, the master that you serve is so generous. He's just so generous. 2021 came. The pandemic continued. This time, the church ministry team decided to help not by sending goods anymore, but to help by sending monetary assistance to those who were hospitalized and who spent much in their struggles against COVID-19. We released money to help people, to help the members of the church, because as I have said, we belong to one family here. We are not just a bunch of people gathering during Sundays. We are family in Zikaek. And we did that. Do you know how we ended up 2021 financially? We ended up over and above what we have expected. And now we are thinking of sharing with pastors who are having a hard time and churches who are having a hard time. And why we do that? This came out during our meeting last second Sunday of January. Our treasurer said, it is amazing. Because the more we release, the more God gives. And the thing that I have learned out of these experiences is that not only that our God is a generous master, but here is the thing, we can never outgive our God. Never. When you release for His kingdom, you can never outgive Him. He will bestow you the things that you have never imagined. That is why the church in Macedonia learned this Even if in poverty, they know that something is going to come. And Paul used that to encourage the church in Corinth. And that same encouragement should resonate among our lives today, because we are serving an unchanging God. Blessings will come not because we deserve them. Blessings will come because our God is generous. And when we release what we have, more will come. Why? Because it's a reality that we can never outgive our generous Master. God bless you and good evening.